Alright, so we are going to do a quick UV pass on this hammer, which looks like this in the low poly form. And once we're done with the UVs, we're going to hop over and do a bake on it. But before we mess with that, there's a little error here in my modeling that I didn't address in the modeling pass that I need to look at, which is this triangle right here. And you can have triangles in your mesh if you want them. There are scenarios where they're fine and scenarios where they're not fine. In this case, it's just an easy problem to fix. Like this little triangle here, I'll probably end up keeping, but this right here is an illegal n-gon. And what that means is it has more than 4 sides, and I definitely do need to address that, because what's going to happen is when this gets put into a game engine, it's going to be triangulated. And if I'm not specific about how I want this to be triangulated, it's going to be random, and there might just be a little bit of a lighting error there. The lighting error just looks like there's a weird shadow on it or something. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an edge that kind of goes around and connects them in that way that we'll just have an extra edge row here. And that should fix the problem. So let's go ahead. I've got my modeling toolkit open right here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on Object X, and the symmetry settings up here. And you can see they have updated right here as well. And then we'll just go to multi-cut, and it'll go ahead and snap to the edges here, and we can just kind of swing around and connect it like so. So now these are all both 4-sided faces. We do still have this triangle here, but again, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and tap the 3 key, hop into object mode, tap the 3 key. And we don't see any obvious lighting stuff going on there, so I think that might be okay. This is an example, maybe right in here, of what a lighting error might end up looking like. So now we're about ready to do the UVs. And before I do that, I'm deciding right now whether or not I want to add one subdivision level. But that's not going to be destructive to the UV process, so I can actually UV this mesh and then just take care of the subdivisions a little later on if I want. So let's go ahead and just jump in. I'm going to go ahead and open up my UV editor. And right now it's basically just going to be random. This is just a variety. Like you can see, I started from a cube, so it still has some inheritance from that. Ooh. But that's clear. This is not going to work for us. So what I'm going to do, the way I like to start is we'll go to create, and then I just do camera-based projection. So these UVs are all, it's just based on the view of the camera, which should be pretty obvious. So I'm going to scoot it off of my 0 to 1 space here. And this is mostly just organizational, so that as I am laying out the UVs, I can move the shells over. And yeah, and I'm just going to go ahead and start going here. So I kind of like to I'm going to tap the Q key so that I can select without having to worry about accidentally moving something. And I can see I've got these guys there instead. And I've also got the symmetry on is helping me here as well. So now I'm just going to go ahead and go to create and camera based. And the thing I like about this is it's just a very easy way. Don't worry about the scaling. I mean, we're going to change all the scaling stuff. I'm just kind of getting it a little bit smaller because it wants to fill this whole space there. And this is essentially a cylinder. And the way that we are going to do cylinders, I'm just holding Shift and double clicking on the row there. And we'll go ahead and do another camera based. I'm just going to pull this off because I'm probably going to hit that button a few more times. And now I need to figure out where I want to put the seam, because remember, think of it as like cardboard. Like I've got to put a cut somewhere so that I can lay this thing flat, and I want to put the cut in the place that is least visible. And that place is going to be right over here. So if I double click this edge in world space, like on the mesh, you can see it will go ahead and select every single mesh, or every single edge here in the UVs. But if I grab the same edge here in UV space and double click it, it will only be limited to the shell itself. So that can be a very convenient time saver. You don't have to go through the whole thing. Once you've created a shell, you can double click on an edge in the shell and it'll just isolate your selection to that shell. So once I've got my edge here that I want to use as where I want to put my texture border, I can just go to cut and then cut. The hotkey for that, by the way, is Shift X. If you prefer that method, that's totally fine. I'm going to go to face mode. Now I need to do what's called unwrapping this, because it's all sort of crumpled up on itself. So over here, sorry, I guess it needs to be in my UV toolkit. which is off the recording area. I'm just going to go ahead and snap that in. So we have unfold here, and you can just hit unfold, and it'll go ahead and essentially unwrap it. And you can see it's got some strange stuff going on, but it's okay. I will probably talk about this in more detail the longer we do this, but the idea for the way that you get the best pack on your UVs is to try to have your shells be as horizontal or vertical as they can possibly be, and that includes the borders. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and add our cuts and not worry too much about the rest of it. So here we've got that shell taken care of. So let's go ahead and we will, I'm trying to think about the best way to do, I'm going to try to put all of this stuff and yeah, so this is probably going to need to be broken off. It's just a little bit awkward. I think I can get all of these top surfaces and the side surfaces on one shell. So let me go ahead and we'll just do some selection here. Sometimes you might think it's going to work, and then you get in there and you realize you've got to add some extra cuts. But it's pretty easy to do that, so no big deal. And then I also mentioned, I think when I was first introducing the concept of UVs, that you want to have as few shells as possible. So there's a reason to try to keep the number of shells as low as possible. Okay, so I've got these faces selected, and I'm just going to go back to camera based, and we'll do an unfold. And so when it unfolds, what it's doing is it's trying to find the arrangement of the polygons in UV space that presents the least amount of distortion relative to what's going on with the geometry. So you can see we're trying to kind of preserve this curve here. So we're getting that baked in, and it's kind of pulling these things at this angle, whereas if you actually look at it from the top, they would prefer to go straight down. So you can, just to sort of demonstrate this, I can add a cut here, and we'll go back, double click that shell. If I hit unfold again, you can see these now are more happy to go this way, but these guys are going to curve over. But now we have this really awkward shape. So it's probably better to do a move and sew on that, and then just come back over and do an unfold. So move and sew is just going to, if you have two edges, for instance, I could come over here, and we can see where these edges are. If I select one set of edges on one shell, the matching edges, because the UV shells can actually share the same edge in world space, they're going to show up over here. So if I wanted to merge these, all I need to do is go to move and sew, and you can see kind of what happens there. These don't have the same texel density, so if I hit unfold, it'll address that. So if I wanted to, I could come over here and weld these guys, and this might actually start to make sense. I want to be careful I don't get whatever is going on over there. And we can do a move and sew. You can always check your UV distortion. Obviously all this stuff here is from the stuff that we haven't looked at yet, but because I have just welded these on, now we're starting to get some distortion here. So this is kind of one of the balancing acts that you've got to do. So I'll just go over here and we'll hit cut again. We can unfold both of these so we get a little bit more relaxation there. And with that, we can take a look here, and you can see we're getting maybe a little bit less distortion. So it's usually not super cut and dry where like one scenario is wildly better than another. This is just one of those things you got to balance. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and grab whatever else is going on up here. Take a look at that. So I'm going to need to deselect probably this stuff here. So we can do those bottom edges, and then this inside stuff is definitely going to have to be on its own shell, at least one shell. And I'm just holding Control to deselect. So now I've got those. I'll go ahead and make a camera-based UV shell out of that selection. We'll just hit unfold. So that is not that great. You can also, once you've unfolded, hit optimize, and it will try to find something that is going to actually pack a little bit better. So you can see I'm spamming it here, as it was kind of distorted. We can see what happens if I hit optimize over here. Not a whole lot. Over here, yeah, not too much. But this one helped a lot. The more you do it though, it looks like there's kind of a sweet spot. All right, and then these are the inside faces, and this stuff down here, which I will deselect. So for the inside faces, we will go ahead and do let's see, camera based, and then unfold. And that's probably about as good as we're going to get. So I'm not worried about this, the relative scale at all. That's something that I can address pretty easily in one fell swoop. And all of this stuff can be on one shell, the cylinder, but the base is going to need to be on its own shell. Cylinder is typically the long part can be on one UV shell, and the top and bottom have to be on their own. So I'll just go over here, and we will do a camera-based selection. We'll do an unfold. And then I've got, let's see, let's just take a look at this. So for the seam here, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of keep it running down that same I guess interior front face. So I can find where that edge is, double select it here. We'll add a cut. Double click the shell and go to unfold, and you can see it unfolds very nicely. Alright, so there is everything broken out into UV shells. So now I need to make everything have essentially the same texel density. So I'm going to go to this Arrange and Layout tab here, and I'm going to hold Shift and left mouse button click on Layout, and that's going to open up my options. So once that's done, we can take a quick look. So you can probably, let me just go ahead and make sure I'm looking at the defaults here. Most of the stuff you can leave alone. This one's pretty important. When we for the shell pre-scaling, we're saying preserve 3D ratios. What that means is we're going to prioritize the relative size of the faces in 3D space when we are rescaling our UV shells, because it can be very easy to have these things just be completely random based on, it'll fill 0 to 1 based on whatever your selection is. So this is completely random and needs to be fixed. This right here just looks at the geometry, the relative size of the geometry in world space, and fixes it. So there I said the same thing twice. Hopefully that helps a little bit. So if I just hit Layout UVs, this is what we get. So if I hit my little checkerboard, you can see now all of the squares are the same, relatively close to the same size. They're never going to be exactly perfect, but they're going to be pretty close. So we have a lot of wasted space here, and that is really, that's not a good scenario. And we've also got kind of a random rotation to all these things. So you can see here, there's this like stair-stepping thing in the lines. That's called aliasing. And just like we can see it here in the UV editor, that same effect happens in textures. Because we're describing these lines here with just rows and columns of pixels essentially. The same exact situation happens in textures, and you end up with like kind of messy seams and just ugly looking stuff. So the best thing to do is try to rotate your faces or your shells so that they are aligned with either a vertical axis or a horizontal axis. It kind of doesn't make a huge difference which way you decide to go, but this is a good trick for making that happen. So let's see, we're at 13 minutes. I'm actually going to show you this good trick in the next video.